of climate change. The second question is, how would you like to see Rochester community address climate change? So what is something that you think that Rochester could do? And type that into the chat and I'll hit enter in 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and enter. Commit to net zero. Electrification, yep. Yeah, using surplus funding for pilot projects, that's a great one. Yeah, these are all really good answers. And it seems like this group already has been thinking about what are some solutions to climate change, which is great. And I think that's helpful for our panelists to know as we begin talking. So the first thing I'd like to do is have a round of introductions. So just for the sake of simplicity, we'll go in the same order whenever we do question answering and introductions. So we'll start with Dr. Molly Herr, and then we'll go to Lauren Jensen, and then Ellen Anderson. So Dr. Herr, if you would go ahead and kick us off with an introduction about yourself.
Well, thank you for inviting me to talk with you guys and to have this discussion. I am a local pediatric anesthesiologist. I have been, I would say, interested in environmental issues for a long time, but it's really been in the last few years that I became really more involved through my work, and just to try to figure out how we can do better.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Jensen. I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Rochester. I've been with the city for about 2 years now. My position was created 2 years ago as the city kind of trying to continue to take steps towards sustainability and forward some of this progress.
I don't know that I want to be on there.
So I get to work on a variety of initiatives across departments that really just look at more environmentally sound, economically, and social equity when it comes to sustainability.
I'm next. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Anderson. I'm the Climate Program Director at MCEA, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. MCEA, if you're not familiar with us, we follow the law and we follow science to protect the environment in many different ways. And we're working on all kinds of ideas for climate policy, better climate policy and better climate solutions. My background is many years in state government, where I served in the legislature and on the Public Utilities Commission and worked for Governor Dayton. And all of these, I was working on energy and environmental issues. And then I worked at the University of Minnesota on energy transition. So really excited to be where we are now with MCEA, advocating for the right climate solution. So good to see you all.
Awesome. Thanks for your introductions, everybody. That's great. So kind of how the rest of this panel will go. We have some set questions that we have, and then we will have a section that the panelists will be able to answer questions from the audience, and then we'll have some final thoughts. So we're going to start here with panelist-specific questions. So our first questions are for Dr. Herr. The first question is, as a physician, how do you see climate change affecting your patients?
There's lots of ways that you can see this. You look at from a broad perspective, and you see things that are happening and flooding in Haiti or after earthquake or things like that. And it's really obvious that you see the effects of climate change, but you see climate change effects here too, and you see them now. So during, warm events in the summer, you can see heat-related injuries. You can see, student athletes who have heat stroke after practices. You can see outdoor workers having issues. You have increased levels of myocardial infarctions with heat waves. You have COPD exacerbations. We have longer allergens cycles. So even things like seasonal allergies are increasing in Minnesota. So compared to 20 or 30 years ago, we have 3 more weeks. Pardon? Can you hear me? I'm not unmuted. So, I mean, you have a longer allergy season. You can see premature births happening with heat waves. So even with, and it doesn't have to be in Arizona where you see this, it's just sort of relative. So even in Minnesota, when we're sort of more temperate, if you have that relative increase in temperature and humidity, and we're not acclimated to it, you can see these effects too. So it really affects all organ systems, from your kidneys and dehydration and renal insufficiency to, foodborne illnesses or not foodborne, but insect-borne illnesses. We have, Lyme disease, or we had Rocky Mountain spotted fever for the first time last summer in Minnesota. So there are a lot of things that are changing because our climate is changing. Pick an organ system, we sort of have things that are changing with it,
So from your perspective as a physician, how does the healthcare industry affect climate change?
So I started getting more interested because I'm an anesthesiologist, and despite starting training about 20 years ago, it wasn't until the last 5 or 6 years that I really realized that all of our anesthesia gases that we use to have people, stay asleep during surgery, that they were really greenhouse gases, and they were really potent greenhouse gases. So I started looking into that. I started looking into how many, we buy them as liquids and we put them into our anesthesia machine, and then they turn into a gas, and you breathe them and you have a breathing tube in. So most of these gases aren't really metabolized by the body, but they go in and you're asleep, and then they are exhaled, and the anesthesia machine captures them, and then all of them are emitted with anesthesia waste gases and medical gases out the roofs of hospitals. So they are many times worse than carbon dioxide. And again, I sort of started looking at how many bottles of agents that we were using, and then you can sort of convert it to the CO2 equivalent. And it doesn't really mean much to me. Like, how many CO2 equivalents is that? What is a metric ton? What is, a half ton? I don't know. But when you convert them to like mileage, you sort of get a good idea. And I was finding that the amount of miles that we were using from our anesthesia gases related or correlated to, 3,000 cars that were being, emitted off the roof of our hospital. And there's many hospitals around the country and the world. So it started sort of that way. So anesthesia is a big, we contribute a lot to it. Healthcare in general is responsible for about 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. The United States greenhouse gases, healthcare is responsible for 27% of the world's. So obviously we're not 27% of the world's population, but we have over our fair share of emissions that come from us. So, I mean, it's really, we're part of the problem, and we do everything in the, first effect, we're helping patients, and we're most concerned with the patient in front of us. But on the same time, we need to realize what we're doing and how it's affecting, the world's 8 billion patients. So, where I work, we have had some education. There's a couple anesthesia agents that are worse than the others. So if we can make some changes to the ones that are more environmentally friendly, something called nitrous oxide is really bad. It lasts over a century in the atmosphere. And then desflurane is another one that's pretty bad. So if we can switch away from several agents and go to other ones and use them more economically and, use lower amounts of them, despite changing patient care, we can have a huge impact. So, and over the last few years, we've had 50% reduction in the amount of greenhouse gases from our anesthesia agents. But I mean, it goes beyond that. And, you look at healthcare and we have lots of disposable items. And I've come to the point where it's sort of like, what do you have to use that's disposable? What can be reused? What can be cleaned appropriately and be safe to use again? And there's actually a lot of things. I mean, people sort of get weirded out by it, but on the other hand, you go to a restaurant, not very much right now for me, but I mean, you use silverware that other people use and it gets washed and it's in people's mouth and they go in the dishwasher and you don't think like you're going to be getting sick from that. So there's things with like proper cleaning that we can be reusing a lot of things. So I think a lot about like a waste hierarchy, and we like to reuse. Actually, we like to reduce. It would be the best thing to do from that standpoint, and then reuse items, and then recycle. And then the worst thing, obviously, is to be throwing them away. So recycling is great, but is there a way that we can reuse them, or is there a way that we can even reduce them? So those are sort of the biggest things we have, and honestly, surgery is a big, we use a lot of, it's really energy intensive. One surgery is as much garbage as a family of 4 in a week. So how can we change that? What can we do to be better? So I can keep on blabbing about this, but if there's anything specific.
Yeah, thank you. I just think it's so shocking the amount that anesthetic gases contribute to the greenhouse gas pollution. It's shocking. And as even as an environmentalist, I was considering using nitrous oxide when I was pregnant because I just didn't know. So it's really important to get this information out.
It's becoming a lot more in the mainstream education of healthcare providers and anesthesiologists. But I mean, honestly, like I said, for 15 years, I was sort of oblivious, or like, oh, well, it's just a little bit, but it's really potent stuff. So we can do things that have change, save us money, provide the same excellent care, and you just tweak things a little bit. So a lot of it is educating my colleagues, and like I said, some people just don't know. So if we can work on that, we can make a big impact.
Great. So thank you for those answers to those specific questions. We'll move over to Lauren for a couple of specific questions for her. The first question I have for you is, what are the most common climate concerns that come to you from Rochester community members? And what do you find as the biggest climate change concern for Rochester?
I think those kind of go hand in hand. I think most people really what they're concerned about is, are we moving fast enough and are we doing enough? I wouldn't say too many people reach out on an individual level with common climate concerns. I've gotten emails here and there about air quality or maybe food insecurity issues. But on a bigger scale, I think what the community is concerned about and the constituents that we do talk to on a regular basis is, are we putting our time and energy into the right things? What's going to make the biggest impact? As a city, we have goals outlined to achieve a 30% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 and an 80% reduction by 2050. To achieve 80% is going to take a lot. And even knowing the science that we know today, it's probably a goal that needs to be achieved even earlier than 2050. So just thinking about how do we get everyone on board with this? How do we make sure that everyone understands what needs to be done to achieve those goals and to make sure that our community can be resilient to what we know we're going to face in the future? We've already seen some of these things, just this last year alone, we experienced drought, there was summer heat waves. Heat waves affected our air quality. Wildfires in Canada affected our air quality here. There were tornadoes in December. We're already seeing these things happen. So, and particularly, we know climate change is going to affect our marginalized population. So what can we do to, protect our entire community and make the entire community resilient? So I think that's the biggest concern when it comes to climate change is where do we put our time and effort? Are we moving fast enough, and are we taking bold enough action, I think?
So what is the answer to that? Are you taking bold enough action? What are you doing now?
Yeah, so legislatively, we have a few different things that we've outlined, and I myself communicate with our legislative analysts at the city. We're pursuing a district energy system in Rochester, so that will heat and cool our City Hall, Mayo Civic Center, and some other downtown buildings, moving it away from steam. And then, we're looking at how we manage our parkland, point source implementation when it comes to stormwater. But I think more exciting too is we just completed a sustainability and resiliency community work plan. So we brought together 45 members across our community that represented a diverse set of voices, particularly highlighting voices that we don't always see in the government decision-making process. And we had them participate in a year-long development of this plan. So we kind of used the community and their lived experience to put together essentially what we would call a climate action plan for our community. So there are 6 different focus areas, everything from climate change resilience to transportation and economy. Everything is how does this make our community more sustainable? How is it equitable for what we're doing for our community? So I think now that we've finished that plan, this is our first year of starting its implementation. Just getting it out there and connecting it with our community partners and across our city departments. There's 34 strategies, 107 tactics outlined to help achieve those strategies. So I think that's kind of the big piece that we're starting to work on, but moving forward too with that, and kind of what I talked about in my last answer is, where are we putting our time and efforts? This first quarter, we're working on an analysis of the priorities that were outlined in our energy action plan. So the energy action plan came in 2017, and that kind of outlined, it set those goals for us, and it gave us priority areas to focus on, which were buildings, transportation, and power generation. And now this completed sustainability plan gives us kind of specific strategies to help meet those priorities. So analyzing which 10 strategies are going to get us the closest to meeting our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So we'll have that by the first quarter of this year, as well as new recommendations for new goals based on the latest science and what other leading cities are adopting. So we know we can do better. We know our goals should probably be a little bit more aggressive. Here's the science and what other people around the country and the world are doing. And here's a pathway to get to that. So that's kind of what we're preparing for this first quarter. But some other specific projects, I mentioned our district energy system, really looking at how we electrify our buildings, how we electrify our public fleet. The city has 12 buses slated for electric buses coming in to use in our public transit, creating rapid transit lines, a downtown circulator, all of these things that we can do to help. Transportation is the sector that by far emits the most greenhouse gas emissions and where we have the most work to do. So anything we can do to continue to reduce vehicle miles traveled by single occupancy vehicles and increase that kind of switch and transition to public transit. We're working on certification to become an EV ready community. So again, just kind of pushing that adoption and infrastructure that's going to be needed to transition our community for electric vehicles. Last year, we set up an air quality monitoring system So that was particularly why we were able to see the effects of the heat waves and the fires here in our community, as we had that system in place. So kind of a lot of different things across the board, because there is a lot that we can do and continue to do and continue to engage with our residents and our community partners on.
Thank you so much for that. That was such a good detailed explanation of what Rochester is working on right now to address climate change. So thank you. So we're going to zoom out a little bit and kind of look at a statewide perspective for a little bit, because all solutions have to have a local and a macro kind of approach. So I'm going to hand it over to Ellen. And the first question I have for her is, what is the state of Minnesota on climate change?
Thanks, Andrea. That's a really great question. And it does very closely relate to what's going on at the local level as well. So I'll say, first of all, Minnesota does have greenhouse gas reduction goals in law. We passed that law in 2007, and that reflects the targets that you mentioned, Lauren. Many states have adopted the same targets that we passed in the state that said there needs to be a 15% reduction by 2015, 30% reduction by 2025, and 80% by 2050. And when we passed those targets, the 80% by 2050 was based on the Paris Agreement, which hadn't happened at the time, but shortly thereafter. It was based on the same targets that scientists said back then was necessary to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions globally enough to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So it was based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which are the leading scientists around the world that come together and figure out what do we need to do about climate change, and what are the challenges, and what does the science tell us? And so that's our law. That law has not been met at the state at all. We've blown past our first target, and we're not on track to meet the 2025 target right now as a state. So I'm really pleased to hear about Rochester being so methodical about trying to reach those targets. That's really important, because the state can't do it without everyone else doing it. It has to happen at the local level and the state level. But we have a long ways to go at the state level to have policies that are stronger. And so the scientists that I mentioned, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they came out with a new report in 2018 that said we have to ramp this up. That limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius is not nearly safe enough for our future, and that's where the 1.5 degree number came out, that's got to be the limit. And that's where the federal standards now that we're hearing from the Biden administration are based on those same targets, which basically says that we actually have to cut emissions about in half across all sectors of the economy by the end of this decade, by 2030, which is really soon and really ambitious. And then we need to get to net zero by 2050. So that's what the latest science says, and we're nowhere near meeting that. So we have a big job ahead of us at the state level. At MCEA, we drafted some legislation in cooperation with the Minnesota House Climate Caucus. And we put together legislation that would have updated the science on that law that we passed in 2007, and would say the targets have to be more aggressive. We have to go for that 45 to 50% reduction in the next 8 years. And we also put out accountability in it to make sure that it's actually implemented, because the law turned out not to have enough teeth, and to make sure that the law is accounting for equity issues, because there are so many frontline communities or most impacted communities that are most affected by climate change issues and the air pollution that goes along with it, as Dr. Herr and Ms. Jensen both said. So those are some of the big issues. So we're trying to get that done. And well, I could talk about some of the key things that we're hoping to accomplish at the state legislature. I don't know. I'll wait till your next question.
No, that's okay. Go ahead and talk about what we're working on at the legislature, and from your perspective, how that affects Rochester community.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So I'll say that last legislative session, the House of Representatives in Minnesota did pass our Next Generation Climate Act that, does update the science and puts accountability and equity in up front. Unfortunately, the Senate would not give it a hearing. So as you all know, we have somewhat of a partisan political divide, and we just have to get past that, because climate change affects everyone and it shouldn't be political anymore. It just can't be. But we have some, so that's been a challenge. We're trying to make progress and get it some support on the Senate side in Minnesota. We passed that bill in the House. We also passed the 100% clean energy bill, which would also be very impactful across the whole state, because it would require that we move towards 100% clean electricity, carbon-free electricity by 2040. And that's, more and more doable, because we are cutting emissions dramatically in the power sector. I should say I spent many, many hours just this week at the Public Utilities Commission listening to the latest plan for Xcel Energy and their power proposals. And when they started their proposal, they said, we want a new gas plant at Becker. And our organizations and others convinced them to not do that after all, that they didn't need that. And now where we're at this week is to say, well, you don't need any little peaker plants either. We don't need new fossil fuel infrastructure is the argument that we're trying to make. We already have fossil fuel infrastructure. We're going to have that for a while to come as we make a gradual transition, but we just can't afford to build new ones. So that's a really important part of how we work on climate, as well as through the regulatory process. And if I could say one more thing about what's going on at the Capitol. So this legislative session will have some policy discussions, of course, but it's also a big bonding and funding budget year. So that's really the highest priority at the legislature. And the governor yesterday just released his big, basically a big climate funding package. And the fact is we have a big surplus in our state funds, and we also have the infrastructure bill that came from the federal government. And so we have the capability to do a lot more things. And so that's really exciting. And you can see some of that coming up at the state capitol over the coming legislative session that starts next week. And this will definitely affect your community and other communities. And they're proposing, millions of dollars for things like more solar on schools, more electric buses, more transit and walking, biking opportunities and access, all kinds of ways to support clean energy transitions, and also a lot of kind of adaptation measures that will protect the water and the land, so that there's more, and communities that need to be more resilient to be able to withstand these extreme weather events that we have, the big floods, the heat waves, et cetera. We need to, there will be funding for things like trying to make heat islands more amenable for humans by planting more trees, and also resiliency in your infrastructure, so that when there's a flood, we don't get inundated and that we are up to date. So those are just a couple of examples. So there's a lot going on there. I encourage you to look into that.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think that's a lot to think about. And I think that a lot of these things really work together. So moving to a question that's just for anybody on the panel. If you could get every person in Rochester to do one thing right now, what would that be?
So when I was thinking about this, there's a lot of things and it's overwhelming. What I think would be most helpful is if people just were mindful and actually thought about it. And if you think about climate change and you see what's happening and you see that it's a climate emergency, here or in other countries, and you are thinking about that, I think that can change behavior. So, for me, I think about, do I need to drive back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? Can I cut some trips? Do I need to, I know that flying, in an airplane is really environmentally unfriendly and it causes a lot of emissions. So really thinking about trips, and everybody likes to travel, and I think that's nice, but really trying to figure out where can I cut back on some of these things, and whether it's like, do I really need red meat, or can I have chicken, or can I just not have meat for the week, or so there are a lot of things that you can think about that you can change your behavior. Clothes is a huge thing, and buying a lot of clothes, and so much of our clothes is wasted and just ends up in landfills. So it is just sort of being mindful that this is climate change is happening and we need to change too. So our behavior cannot be business as usual. This is what I do. That you just thinking about it, and I know that's sort of not real specific. But I feel like if more people just actually thought about it, it would change little behaviors, so that's where, your energy, do I need it at this temperature in my house? Can I have a couple degrees cooler in the winter and a couple degrees warmer in the summer? So it's going to take some effort. It's not easy. And so those are things that I think about.
So it sounds like we need to have everybody right on their hands that right now is a climate crisis, so it can be constantly on your mind. Anybody else want to answer that question?
Yeah, I think to add to that, there are a lot of good things like Molly just mentioned on a day-to-day basis. I think, in terms of what I've kind of touched on and some of my answers previously is, really talking to your elected officials and urging them to take action. I think it's municipalities, it's large corporations, it's states that are, these bigger emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's them that needs to take the action to make the changes, but they need to hear from their community members. And we need, talking to your city council members who represent you, or your representatives at the state level, whatever it may be, to continue to speak up and advocate for those things, because I think sometimes people feel like it's the same old people maybe preaching to the choir about it, but we can always use that support, and just, for them to understand that it matters to you as a constituent, and that there are things that they want you to think about and prioritize, whether it be in your funding or your budget or the projects that you're pursuing, like just continuing to let them know, because they're there to represent the community. And we can do a lot as a municipality, as just like city staff, but it all comes down to city council to make final decisions. So just at any level, continuing to just use your voice and advocate for those changes that you want to see.
Yeah, I think you two really covered the issues extremely well, because on an individual level, there is so much. There's waste in energy, there's waste in our products that we use, there's composting and recycling things. We can do all of those things and make, those really contribute a lot of greenhouse gas emissions when they add up. Everything really adds up. And I couldn't agree more with what you said as well, Lauren, that we have to educate ourselves enough that we know what needs, get an idea of what needs to happen, and then we need to make sure we educate our elected officials and the candidates, and that you really are informed about what their positions are and how they're going to vote on these things, and that you get commitments from your candidates that are running for office that here's what they're going to do. And that's because there's strength in numbers, and the more Minnesotans who speak out on these kinds of things, the more impact we can have. Because it seems pretty clear from lots and lots of polling that most Americans think climate is a serious issue that needs to be addressed, and they want solutions, and they want, as you said, Lauren, bold solutions that actually get us there. But somehow that voice gets lost in sometimes in the political noise. So it's really important for everyone to be, part of the solution that way.
And I think, just to kind of add to that too, it can be daunting as an individual, or sometimes just feel overwhelming to people, like all the actions they could take to be more sustainable in their day-to-day life. And just, does it matter? Does it make a difference? So yeah, or I think urging, using your voice to urge those bigger players to make those changes.
Well, and it can be really hard to distinguish what's political noise and what's not. So I really like that phrase that Ellen used, if a political noise, and thinking about, is this political noise or is this something that's really true about what you're hearing in the media, can probably be really helpful too. So we hear a lot about how we are in dire straits, right? Because we are in climate crisis and so many bad things are happening. But I think we often lose sight about things that might give us hope. So I'm hoping to get some answers from you three about what's something that gives you hope in this fight against climate change.
I might jump in on this. I had the good fortune this year to go to Scotland for work from MCEA to the UN climate talks. And this is kind of a life-changing experience to go and meet with people, 30,000 people from virtually every country in the world. And they are all there. I mean, there were definitely a lot of fossil fuel lobbyists there, but most of the people there that representing almost every country in the world was there because they're on this mission. They believe that we have to tackle climate change. So it's very compelling to see that and to have, to not have that political noise overwhelming everything. It's about what are we going to do about it and who's going to do what and what's the responsibility of the wealthy countries and what's the responsibility of the developing countries and how can we help each other. But it's also, it just really hit me in my gut that we are so all in this together. And, the United States is not going to be successful in meeting our climate goals unless each of the areas of each of the states and each of the regions play a role. Each of us do our part and local communities, but also, the whole world is facing this together. And so we have to work together towards it. So that was really motivating for me. And I know not everybody can go do that, but just to know about that, I think is really, it's awe-inspiring to me that 200 countries of the world can sit around the table and find consensus that we have to take action on climate.
I second that. I don't know if it's just where I am right now, but I haven't been as aware of, some of these UN conferences. I was aware of the Paris Accords, our agreement and what they wanted to do in Kyoto. But I think it's just come to the top of a lot of people's minds now. You look at studies that show what Americans believe about climate change, and we're sort of shifting. There used to be a pretty proportion of climate deniers, and now that is moving to people who are more alarmed and really worried about it. So, I mean, that is wonderful. I have been working with some awesome medical students. I don't know if Sean is still on here, and I think he is, and Giovanna, who are really interested in climate change and what we can do, and environmental justice and social justice. So I think young people are more involved. I'm an anesthesiologist, and I've had residents have a new interest group. We are working on medical school education curriculum changes to include climate change and health. So that's new. Obviously, in retrospect, this would be great if it happened 10 years ago, but it's happening now, and that's better than nothing. And I think people are motivated. I'm happy with, the United States joined on as one of 50 countries to join the health program and at COP26, which basically is looking at healthcare's contributions and how we can become cleaner and greener. You know, we always just, like I said, we chalked it up, well, we're in healthcare, we just have to do what do we need to do, but now actually figuring out how we can cut emissions and we can be better. So I don't know the exact specifics of this health program that we've signed on, but like, you know, 50 countries are doing it, and how can, and it actually is involving with like actually having institutions see what their greenhouse gas emissions are and setting target dates, which a lot of places haven't done before. So all of that gives me hope.
I mean, I would really agree with what's been said so far. You know, I too got to go to Germany in September. Rochester is one of 5 cities in Minnesota that participates in a climate smart municipalities exchange program with 5 German cities, and just the opportunity, I think, to continue to learn from what other people are doing around the world, because it isn't just one city that's going to, you know, make this happen and solve climate change. It's all of us working together to achieve that outcome. And so, you know, there are things that they're much farther ahead of than we are here, and we can learn from that. But there are things we're doing differently here that they can learn from as well. And, you know, our younger people, for sure, we have so much interest from high school students in Rochester wanting to participate in environmentally related programs or project ideas, or inviting us to come and speak to their groups or their classes to learn more about what the city is doing. And that is something we wholeheartedly will take them up on. You know, if there's passion and desire there to do it, we're there to influence and be a resource and support and help make that happen. You know, climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue, it's a social equity issue. And I think more people are starting to see that interconnectedness, and I think it's drawing more people in and changing their minds about how we look at climate change and how we approach it in any of the projects or the initiatives that we take on. So all of that gives me hope. You know, there's a lot more people starting to take it seriously in a generation that's coming up that I think is really going to do a lot of good.
And I hear a pretty common thread in all of these. And what I'm hearing in every single one of those answers is young people. And I think that's worth highlighting, is that there are a lot of young people getting involved in this issue, and it's noticeable, and they're doing a lot of good work. So yay, young people, go young people. So we're going to move into the questions that you've all been putting into chat. Please continue putting questions into chat, and we will do our best to get through them. We only have about 20 minutes or so for this portion, so we'll try to do our best for this. So continue to put questions in your chat. The first question is for Ellen. So it says the Environmental Quality Board is currently running a pilot for a new drafted environmental assessment worksheet that for the first time takes GHGs into consideration in large development projects. However, it seems like the EIW only requires documentation, not necessarily any action to meet goals. How do you think the new worksheets will impact Minnesota's GHG ambitions?
Wow, that's a good question. So this is something that MCEA has been working on for several years. So first of all these acronyms. So the Environmental Quality Board is the EQB, and it's basically a sub-cabinet group of commissioners from a number of different state agencies and the governor's office. And they're supposed to really make policy decisions and environmental review across different sectors, you know, so that they come from different kinds of places, like, you know, agriculture and transportation, et cetera. So the EQB did approve this pilot project, and what we've been fighting for at MCEA is that when you have a project where you want to build something of a certain size that could affect the environment, then you really need to measure what the climate impact of it would be. And that's never been required before, until we went to court and won a lawsuit on that. And at a large, CAFO, or large feedlot farm, And they were required to go back and come up with an accounting of what the greenhouse gas emissions would be of this project. So environmental review, the way it's defined in law, it doesn't tell you you have to do something, like you can or can't do something usually. What it tells you is here's what the impacts are. And then the decision makers are the cities or the state agency that is in charge of, making that call for that particular project. And so it would be better if these environmental assessments would say, okay, you've exceeded some limit of greenhouse gas emissions, but that's not what the law calls for yet. Hopefully we can get there at some time, but we know that when you have the information about greenhouse gas emissions from a project, then say you in your community or anywhere else in the state, somebody wants to build a big building or or something, on a green field. If community members are aware of what the environmental impacts are and the climate impacts, then they can have a voice in the process and try to require that their community, reduces the emissions before they approve a project. So again, it's not a perfect solution, but it's a big step forward to get that information out in the public transparently. And then this project will push them to say, how could you mitigate this? How could you reduce your emissions? And then it'll be a tool that'll allow us to allow local communities to make better decisions about what happens in their community and what the climate impacts are going to be, or how they can reduce those impacts.
I just wanted to comment for a sec. This sort of brings up something that is occurring in Olmsted County or outside of Rochester here. We have a new development that is proposed in an area that has a Heron Rookery. So basically 20 acres or so of heavily wooded forests that has a Heron Rookery on for, since the 70s. It's really hard. Things sort of happen quickly and, things get okayed, and unfortunately, sometimes the public doesn't know about it until the ball is already rolling. We have a group called the Save the Rookery that's trying to save it. We've had excellent community buy-in by high school students. They're called young rookies, and by the community that have really pushed hard at the county level and at the township level. And it's been frustrating because a lot of times many people don't think about local government or running or being on boards. They don't think about it. So oftentimes the people who are on these boards have been on for years and years and years and know everybody else. And I wanted to bring this up. I mean, basically this 20 acres would be cut down to, build new pretty big houses, and it's on a hill, and there's, the herons move, you have issues with, taking down trees, which we actually should be, planting more trees or keeping what we have. It's on a hill that goes down into a creek. Then there is issues with, pollution or flooding. And it's unfortunate that despite a lot of community community who is against it, that it seems to be, there's lawsuits at this level, but that it was okayed through other steps when it's just sort of a bummer. I bet there's somebody, some people on here maybe during the open session who can talk about that and how we can work with that too.
And I'm wondering if Rochester is probably one of the cities participating in this pilot, this EQB pilot, because you're part of the climate smart municipalities, because we reached out to you, but I don't know that for sure. And so that would be something worth checking to see if that there is environmental review that's still underway, that more information, that this could be helpful, but I don't know off the top of my head. We can sure find out.
Thank you.
Dr. Herr, I don't know if this was related to what the project you were talking about, but someone put in a question here. Can someone comment on Rochester's growth, including the Destination Medical Center, and preserving our existing forests and natural areas? Is anything being done?
I can't comment a lot on Destination Medical Center. I know a little bit more about, how the housing development, and, we don't really have, it appears, to me that, saving what we have, and, where can houses go, and what makes sense. And, I don't know. Lauren, do you have any idea better with the DMC? I mean, I certainly like this area is like incredibly wooded. You look at a satellite map and it's like the densest area. So it's like, there are other options in this fight, buying it and making it, natural. You guys can, somebody get SNA or, you guys probably know that term better, natural sanctuary, something. But how about the DMC, Lauren?
Yeah, I don't know specifically in regards to this rookery. I have heard about that. I know with the DMC, I work very closely with Kevin Bright, who is their sustainability, energy and sustainability director for the DMC in the city. We both kind of jointly coordinate on projects across each of our entities. So sustainability is for sure something we're always thinking about, and the triple bottom line to it. So I know like most of their developments happen within the they have certain districts. Most of them are within town or in the downtown area that they oversee or provide funding to. And at least for those, if people are looking for assistance in funding or like tax increment financing opportunities, there are sustainable building guidelines that are outlined for those. In relation to our natural areas and like our parkland and stuff in Rochester, the city is going through a master plan update for the Parks and Forestry Department, as well as a parkland like land management plan that they're also consulting as a part of this. So those are both things that I connect with the Parks Department on to provide feedback to make sure that we are thinking about these things and keeping them in mind. But there will for sure be public comment opportunities with both of those processes coming up. So I think keeping an eye out for those and just continuing, like I said, to use your voice as a resident. It's certainly things I advocate for, but it only helps to have the community members speak up and advocate for them as well. So just knowing there's a Parks Master Plan update and a Parkland Management Plan that will be coming forward shortly.
Thank you for that. Michael's had his hand up for a little while, so I'm going to call on him to ask his question.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Great. So thank you, Molly, for bringing that up. I'm very involved in the Save the Rookery. And yes, our goal is to buy the land and turn it into an SNA. But the point is, like you said, that at the county level and then certainly at the township level, even though the community showed up and had standing room only, our voices were not heard at all. And the development went ahead. Well, didn't go ahead because we have 3 lawsuits going on to stop it and ask for a full environmental impact study. And that's where it is. Also, coming from the East Coast, I moved here about a year ago. And on the East Coast, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And the amount of effort and support for land trust is amazing. We buy so much land there by people donating money. And in Nantucket, they have a land bank where they actually tax every land transaction like 2% that goes towards conservation. And I would love to see, our Save the Rookery group. We're hoping that saving this woods is the first step to creating a much larger land bank in the area. So I would, I think it's a matter of changing the attitude of the people in charge, or voting in new people who are aware of the importance of the environment. So yeah, and then it was a great turnout. I think it was last Tuesday from the youth rookies down at the government building protesting. So, the word is getting out, and the people support the environment and conservation, but we can't seem to get the people who are making the decisions, both at the county and the township level, to see what the people are asking for.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment on that? If not, we can move on to another question too. That's fine. I have another question here. This one came from Ishan, and I think that some of it's been answered in the chat, but I wanted to bring it up forward too. In Rochester, how can renters get in on solar? There are a lot of students, fellows, residents who live in Rochester, and I'm curious if there are pathways for us to participate in solar.
Yeah, so I touched on this a bit in the chat response, but as a city, as a city entity, pursuing solar is a little difficult due to our contract with SIMPA right now. But we are trying to continually find ways that we can promote it or assist private property owners with solar development or installation. We are in communication about potential opportunities for solar on low income and or multifamily properties. And we are putting together solar certification checklists. The city is Soul Smart certified, but not at the gold level. So we're working towards moving that up, which includes that checklist, which basically just ensures that new developments and homes are built to be solar ready instead of having to be retrofitted later on to be able to put solar on them. But then we're also working on handouts and resources that would assist people who are interested in putting solar on their buildings, what's available and what the process is now for them to take. So there are quite a few strategies in our sustainability plan that touch on solar and ways we can continue to help private property owners put solar on, including funding opportunities or like green energy loan funds that we're pursuing to put together so that we can help people finance solar as well. So it is something we're thinking about. As a renter, it's a little more difficult. You would have to obviously speak to the person who owns the property. But if there are resources or support that we can pass along to them or open up a door for conversation, always happy to help with that, or even connect you with the folks at RPU who would be able to assist you with rebates, tax incentives. There's still a lot of great options out there for solar.
And I'll just add that's you obviously know what you're doing on solar, and that's a really good list. The community solar program was created by state legislation in 2013, and it's only applies to pretty much to Xcel Energy. Some of the other utilities, our investor-owned big utilities, have adopted some version of a solar garden program, and it'd be great to try to get your municipal utility to do that at some point, or SIMPA, but I don't know if that's in the cards. But that's designed as a way that people who are renters can, you can own part of or rent, basically. You can subscribe to part of a solar array, and then you get the reduction on your bill for the amount of solar that the array produces, and it doesn't have to be physically on your building. So it's a way for everyone to participate in solar more easily. But yeah, it's not a statewide program right now, so that's something to think about trying to build in the future if possible.
We do have some community solar. I mentioned that in the chat response, but I forgot to include that. So again, I can if someone is interested in that, can connect them with RPU to see what the options are there.
I also saw here in chat, there were a couple of questions about Project Drawdown, which I know Ellen knows a little bit about. So I wonder if I could put you on the spot to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, I haven't looked at all the comments about Project Drawdown, so I'm not quite sure what the question is, but Project Drawdown is a globally facing organization that has a big footprint of people in Minnesota working for it. And they have identified, what are the most significant climate solutions around the world that it would take to meet, global emissions reduction goals that we need. And they came out with their first book in, I think it was 2018, the Drawdown Solutions book. And it was really a game changer because it did kind of look at all different elements and came up with this list based on science of what would be the best way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to incorporate equity and economics into it. And for example, one of the things that they endorsed was globally was educating girls and women, and that would be one of the most important climate solutions in many countries of the world where women and children and young women don't have access to education, and it makes a huge difference in how they're in their life, what the impact is for their own lives and how it changes their economic status and their health status. So it's a really interesting group, and they continue to do projects. So I'm sorry, I don't know what the questions are, but they're a great organization, and we were going to partner with them on I guess I should say we have this other project we're working on. Basically, we're writing our own climate plan for Minnesota that is based on the latest science because we don't really have a specific climate plan for the state. I know the state agencies, they're working really hard to create a plan. This is, gone on for quite a while, and it's hard for them to come up with a plan that is really as stringent as we actually need to meet the science. So we're going to put something out there in a few months, so stay tuned on that. And Project Drawdown was going to be, has been giving us advice on this and partnering with us to a certain extent.
Thanks. I think that actually addresses some of the questions that were typed into the chat. There was more just some general interests. So thank you. I think that's all the time we have for participants' questions. I know there were a few we didn't get to. I'm so sorry about that. So I think we'll start with Dr. Herr for final thoughts, and then we'll go to Lauren and then Ellen.
Well, I enjoyed the conversations today. I'm learning new things myself. I sort of have been focused a lot on the healthcare aspects and the health effects of climate change. It makes me think of what more can I do? And I think that it's brought up, talking more with elected officials. It'd be really nice if this could go to a Senate hearing and talk about this. What do we want to do? We can't just keep on kicking this down the road. This can, as they say, that at some point we really have to make some big changes. I've been really excited about healthcare, and hopefully that where I'm working will make some big changes. It's always hard, to get to the right people, wherever you are, getting to, the Senate level or getting it in the legislature, getting it to people that you work with, the higher ups, and making it be a focus. I think it's coming along. I'm hopeful. I mean, you have to stay hopeful. What are your options right now, except to keep on keeping on and making some changes and knowing that things will, with more people, that things will improve. So that's what I have to say right now.
I guess my concluding thoughts would be one, just thank you for having me here today. It's great to have the opportunity to just get to talk and interact with people about this and talk about something that I'm personally passionate about. That's why, I chose this line of work, obviously, but just if people, like I said, continue to be active, to participate, to use your voice, to advocate for the things you want to see in our community. There's a lot that we try to do as city staff, but there's certainly more we could do with community support behind us. Check out our sustainability plan. I really think there's something for anyone in there if they want to be involved. And it's really written as a community plan, understanding that while there is a lot that the city tries to do, we really are just trying to set an example and be a leader. There's a lot of other things that community members or organizations or individuals can do on their own, and we're just here to support and influence that. So always an open door if there is interest for further discussion or questions or resources of any kind. We're happy to help forward the work in our community here.
Well, thanks for giving me the last word here. This has been really a great conversation, and I really appreciate everyone who's been listening and putting these great questions out. You're obviously really attentive to what's going on in your community. And it is really a pleasure to hear Molly and Lauren talk about their perspective. And I mean, I learned a lot from both of you, and it's just making me feel like, yeah, there's so much potential to make progress when you're figuring out what to do as an anesthesiologist to reduce emissions in a hospital, which never occurred to me was an issue. And Lauren, you're doing really comprehensive work in Rochester. So to me, it's very inspiring that each of us can make an impact. But I guess I would say the other thing that we're hearing is really that, making progress on climate is also about democracy, and that we have to have a sense of democracy, that our voices will be heard. And I guess we've heard a lot of frustration that people feel their voices aren't heard. So that's just a really important takeaway, that we have to keep the pressure on our elected officials and on our candidates at all levels. And I say that as a former, I was a senator for 18 years, and I know it's not easy to respond to everybody, but it's your job to be honest and open and to respond to your constituents. And if, that's what people need to do. So that's really important. And I think, for example, the bill that I talked about, the Next Generation Climate Act, it put, accountability into law. And so that might be what it takes. It's not easy to pass a law like that, but I saw something in chat that said, well, what about adding more lanes to the highway at the same time we're putting all this money into electric vehicles and biking and trails? And those are both true. And the fact is, we have to hold all those levels of government accountable as well. And that was what our bill said, like everything you do, all your actions have to take into account the climate impacts. So I think we're going to have to be comprehensive. The other thing I'd say is, we talked about some of the sacrifices that you might have to, we talked about sacrifices, like if you want to do something about climate, maybe give up your hamburgers for a while, some of the days, or, be more careful about how you manage waste or turn down your heat. And those things are all really important. But I think it's also important for us to remember that if we have true climate solutions, that would bring a better quality of life for most of us. And, we sort of take for granted, there's so much air pollution around us from the vehicles that we all drive. And if we could shift to a different kind of transportation vehicles, our air will be so much cleaner, and it'll reduce respiratory diseases. There's so much of that comes from the pollution from these fossil fuel generating plants and from vehicles and other sources. And so, now there's a lot more knowledge about, when you use natural gas in your home to run your stove, you're actually putting unhealthy air into your home. And so think about we could have a better world if we can really reach some of these climate solutions. And so I think it's important to be positive too about some of the benefits that we would get from this, besides jobs, besides equity, but also health and quality of life is a possibility. So I think it's important just to really message that there's some really good outcomes that can come from this. And so, yeah, thank you all so much. And if every town, if every city in Minnesota had an conversation like this, I think we could go far. We could go far in making progress. So thank you so much for inviting me.
I so agree with that. We should all be having more conversations like this for sure. And one of the things that we're trying to do at MCEA is get this conversation moving with more voices. And we have to do that in the Senate side. The House has made a commitment to make some action on climate change, and the Senate is still a little hesitant to have the conversation. So we've put an action alert in the chat that requests you to send a message to your senator to make sure that we have a hearing in the Senate on the Next Generation Climate Act. And I know that Lauren already put her action alert in there as well in the chat. And I think Aaron also repeated that. So please check out the sustainability plan for Rochester. And then finally, the last thing I'm putting in the chat is just a resource for you to learn a little bit more about what we do at the legislature and what we're working on this session. So this is a illustrated policy primer that details the laws that we try to protect and what issues we work on at the legislature, including climate. So with that said, I want to thank the panelists for being here. This has been a really productive and inspiring conversation. And I know I've learned a lot, and I hope you all have too. And thanks to all of the participants for being in this conversation and for asking your thoughtful questions. We can't have this conversation without you all. So thanks, everybody. Have a great evening and stay warm.